Hi. Okay. Good. Okay. Welcome once again. Try to give you a context in which we can better understand Edmund Burke's ideas, right? His philosophical thoughts, political thoughts, and and also because the French Revolution has a huge impact in Western Europe and also later on all over the world. I mean, mostly so in Western Europe. That that we can't really prudently understand the ideas of Edmund Burke if you don't truly understand what the French Revolution is or was. So here we got the context, right? So the French Revolution. The French Revolution had a huge him had a huge, maybe more so an influence, not influence, but then it enabled Burke to respond against the revolution in France. Now you may think that was he against the French Revolution? Well, the simple answer is yes. He was. Like things which many of the prevailing ideas, such as the liberal ideals, which were under whose banner the French Revolution was carried out, right? That there was something wrong with those ideals. Wrong in the sense not bad, but in the sense that misplaced ideals, right? And and Edmund Burke tried to clarify, and not to clarify, but show us precisely what those were, and we'll discuss that. So the French Revolution, which initiated in 1789, right? It it started with this. It was carried out under the banner of the famous dictums of the French Revolution, the liberté, uh, equality, and fraternity. In other words, the liberty, egalitarian, and fraternity, right? The three dictums, the mode structure, the whole system of the society, political, social, economic. It finally swept away the old regime, and the revolution carried out in the name of these liberal ideals that were more or less expounded by a group of small, highly influential intellectual elites such as Rousseau, right, Voltaire, Diderot, D'Alembert, right. Those thinkers had a huge, like a uh, it was like a testing machine, right? It was a place the revolution enabled or gave opportunity to put these ideals which were being expounded by these intellectuals to be put into practice, right? The ideas, and what were those ideas? Those ideas that human beings are inherently equal, that each individual possess certain natural and inalienable rights that no government may legitimately violate it without the consent of that concerned individual. And also, it also propounded they too. It is very difficult to resist such ideas. It is no wonder, right? Hence, it is no wonder that the ideas of Marx, the ideas of communism, the ideas of socialism is very attractive even to this day. It's never, I don't think it will ever go out of fashion. I don't think so. No matter how technologically advanced society gets, the ideas of socialism, right, the ideals of Marxism, right, and the ideals of communism, they will never stop because they're very, very enticing, right? They are. Yeah, imagine equality for all, right? No inequality, that everyone will be rewarded according to each um, 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 labor, not labor, that's not the right word, but then whatever you put in, you get that. I mean, you'll be rewarded accordingly, right? No religion, no state, no government. Those are very, very utopic ideas. And it is precisely because they're very, very utopic, fantasy, no land, right? Because those ideas are precisely because those ideas are utopic, they are that is what makes them very, very attractive in the first place, right? And hence I don't think they'll ever go out of fashion, right? And indeed, even the ideals of the French Revolution, the liberty, right, the egalitarian, right, the fraternity, right, those are very, very enticing to a very, if you are a peasant in France in the you're living in poverty, right? There's no room for social mobility, right? You're a peasant, you will die a peasant, your children will die a peasant, right? So to say and for group of people to say, yeah, you know what, from now on things will change. We believe in liberty, equality, egalitarian, right, fraternity. Why would you not be enticed by it, right? Okay, so those were the things under which the revolution was carried under, right? It was carried under those ideals. And then what happened was States General, right? It was States General. It was called the States General, and it was comprised of three legally recognized states, right? And those three states were classes were the nobility, the clergy, which is the church, and the people at large, who were represented by the bourgeoisie or the middle class, right? So the the first two classes, right, the nobility and the clergy, they maintained the status quo because they traditionally enjoyed privileges, power, right, economic, social, political power. They enjoy those privileges, and hence they prefer things not to change at all. Right? They prefer the way it is. Right? They're happy with it. While the bourgeoisie, the third estate, the bourgeoisie, led by the bourgeoisie, the middle class, they were dissatisfied. Right? They were discontented with the status quo. They want things to change. Right? They want things to change. Now the question becomes, why did they want things to change? Well, in order to understand, right? In order to understand why the bourgeoisie wanted to change the power structure in France, not just in France, but it happened, but not in the revolutionary way elsewhere in Western Europe, but in France, was precisely because what was happening, what was happening in economic scenario, in the economic scene, right? So what happened was that before the French Revolution did happen, well, before it happened, in the French Revolution was 1789. Before that, in the 1750s, right? In 1750s, we have what is now known as the Industrial Revolution, right? Now, with the advent, right, with the commencement, with the advent of Industrial Revolution, it brought about it brought about copious changes in the society, right? with the with the introduction of machines, right, industry became possible. With the introduction of machines, manufacturing factories became possible. With machines, railroads, building of railroads helped. Large scale shipping and movement of commerce became more possible, as elucidated by Adam Smith, right, and David Ricardo. And also with the coming of the industrial revolution, we have now what is known as the urbanization and also the secularization of the society. Now let's digress from this topic a bit so that we may understand the context of the French Revolution as well. You see, industrial revolution had a huge influence in changing the existing social structure, not just the social but also economic and political structure of the society, right? Not just in France but also in England, everywhere in Western Europe and in America, right? Even in Japan, right? But so the thing is, with the commencement of industrial revolution, what you get is urbanization, right? People coming from rural areas to urban centers for seeking job, right? Trying to do commerce, right? So urbanization initiates in such during these times, and also what we have is the secularization, right? Secular, more or less the removal of religion from the state, from the affairs of the state, right? You more or less remove state and religion, separate realms, and this secularization is more or less, we can see it as a culmination, right, a culmination of the ideals of Renaissance, right, of the ideals of the age of reason, right. I say this because you see, what we find is that the Industrial Revolution, as such, and secularization also can be seen as the as the product of the Age of Renaissance, right? You see, during the Age of Renaissance, what we find is that we begin to see we begin to see first time for the first time in not in human history, for the first time in Western history, because elsewhere in the world you have so many civilizations that were way ahead of the Western society by this time, right? So we cannot say that it's the first time in human history because that's not. But for the first time in Western history, you have during the age of Renaissance, you have the adulations, right? You have the adulations of human reason, human rationality, right? The rise of science, right? The rise of science. All of this, the rise of science, human rationality, reason, undermined undermined the power, the structure, and the authority of the church and religion itself, right? It did. It had a huge influence upon minimizing and also undermining the power structure of the whole system, especially religion. So what we find is that all the ideas, human ideas of science, mathematics, they ultimately culminated in industrial revolution, right? With machines, printing press, right, factories, shipping, railroads, right, and commerce, open commerce, urbanization, secularization, where you removed religion from the affairs of life, from daily affairs of human life in society. So those were highly essential. Um, those were the essential aspects of the industrial revolution, and this aspect had these aspects affected, right, affected the by challenging and undermining the existing structure, economic, political, and social structure of the society, right? Because of industrial revolution, the bourgeois became more influential because they had the money, right? They had the money. They became even more influential. And because they became more influential, they wanted more representation, they wanted more power, more or less in parallels with the powers of the nobility and the clergy. But on the other hand, the nobility and the clergy would have none of it, right? No, of course not. Why would we give you just because you are a merchant, or you are a bourgeoisie, or you are a, or what do you call it? Um, in the words of Karl Marx, because you are a capitalist class because you own the means of production. Why should you get more power like us, right? The nobility and the clergy, no, we will not have it, right? We will not give you, right? And the bourgeoisie, they don't like it. They were dissatisfied with it. They were discontented with that, with the status quo, and they wanted things to change. They wanted things to change, so that the political structure of France reflects the influence of the bourgeoisie, which nobility and the clergy really did not like it, right? Right? They would be, I'm sure that the nobility and the clergy would be thinking, oh, this pumped up, arrogant bourgeoisies, who do they think they are, right? To ask for such powers, right? So, so yeah, so so the thing is, now you see why the bourgeois or the middle class they wanted more power. They were dissatisfied with it, while the nobility and the clergy wanted things to remain as it is. And then what we find is that we now have three groups in France, and within these groups, within the relation between these groups, we find an undercurrent, right? Resentment or discontentment brewing underneath the surface, right? That that the new emerging class of bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, the middle class, wanting more influence in the way things are in the political arena, but then being not given a chance to represent that, to reflect their growing influence in the public sphere. So what you have is that such kind of discontentment, right, provided provided a scenario provided not a scenario, but then it made it potent. It made it possible for the revolution to take place. Not that they planned for a revolution. You see, I want you to pay attention to me. They never planned for a revolution, but they were discontented with it. And such discontentment provided a ripe situation, right? Provided a situation or provided an environment in which such revolutionary ideals could be harbored, right? You see, the reason why I say this is because what actually led to the French Revolution was not planned, right? If you ask about how it's actually started, it actually the king actually commenced, right? Initiated. He called the States General to a meeting, right? To a session, right? He called the States General to session, right? And the king wanted to discuss about how to secure new revenues, right? Just to secure new revenues, right? Because the economic situation in France was not going too well, right? The king needing more revenues, he called upon the States General, the three classes, the legislature, the French legislature, to session to discuss how to secure new revenues, right? It was that event that actually ignited the revolution. You see, you get the point, right? So the king, trying to secure more revenues, he called into session the States General. But from there, disagreement arose, right? And already the third estate, they already were feeling resentful towards this nobility group, this nobility class, and the clergy state, right? And they would have none of it, right? Because if nobility and the clergy will have none of it with regards to giving more powers to the bourgeoisie will have none of it in attempts of the king to secure more revenues, right? And from their situation uh, became hostile, right? Resentment, the pent up, the repressed resentment were let go, right? And situation rapidly disintegrated, and then that led to a revolution, where we now find the famous depiction of the French Revolution, where you find everybody going towards the Bastille, right? Towards the Bastille where the king was, right? So, and this leads us to one more thing. You see, this leads us to the uncertain nature about the emergence of revolution. Revolutions are never, you can never say that revolutions are planned because revolutions are never planned, right? They are always spontaneous, right? They are unplanned, right? And there were so many studies. There were some good studies being done, and there were some studies which were published in some reputable journals, and those studies suggest that revolutions don't really happen. They're never. Revolutions are never planned. And if you actually look at all the revolutions, right, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and even, for instance, the Russian Revolution, they are not planned, right? They are never planned. Of course, there are some resentment by the people against towards the ruling elite, towards the present structure of the society. But then it's never planned. Yes, we all feel resentful towards the existing system, but then to plan a revolution, let us have a revolution. It's difficult. You never have a planned revolution. Revolutions. That's why we have to understand the spontaneous nature of the revolution. This is why I think that as attractive as the ideas of Marx is, or the ideas of communism, or the ideas of socialism, I think revolutions are never planned. It is never planned. If you actually look at one very recent example, right, would be if you look at the way the Arab Spring, right, which happened in 2011, right, we had Arab Spring revolution in the Middle East and throughout the Levant. And in that revolution, if you think about it, the revolution was never planned. The revolution actually started, the Arab Spring, what we now know as the Arab Spring Revolution. It started with this. vegetable seller, right? A vegetable vendor. He burned himself. He self mutilated himself. I mean, he literally he burned himself, right, in the middle of the street, and that initiated the Arab Spring. And from there, from Tunisia, that was Indonesia, and from Tunisia it spread to Libya, to Morocco, to Egypt, right, to Syria, right, that is going on even to this day, to Yemen, to Bahrain, right, all over the Levant and the Middle East, Levant in North Africa. All these things, all these people rising up against the government was all unplanned. It was all spontaneous. People just emerging out of their houses into the streets and revolting and protesting and going against the government. Right? Even the most famous depiction of the Arab Spring, which happened in Egypt, right? In Egypt, in the Tahrir Square, you find there that revolution over there, right? The people of Egypt overthrowing Hosni Mubarak was not planned, right? It was never planned. It was all spontaneous, right? Much in the same way, even the French Revolution was spontaneous. It was never planned. Of course, you had people who had been uh, citizens who were not very happy and quite resentful towards the government, right? They were quite resentful towards the government for making their life miserable, right? Horrible economic condition, horrible political condition, horrible social condition. But then those horrible conditions enables the citizens or the subjects to hold resentment, to hold grudges towards the government. But what actually ignites a revolution is just a simple event, a simple unrelated event, which which becomes an excuse for the for which becomes an excuse for people to let go, to let out all that repressed, resentful resentment against I'm sorry resentment towards his government. And that's how revolution starts, that's how revolution happens, right? It's never planned. So so you may plan as much revolution as possible, right? You may have the best plan for revolution, but it will never happen, right? Try and see. If you don't believe me, try and see, right? No, really. That's why when communism talks about revolution, which is more or less planned, never happens, right? It never happened, and will never happen, and it will never go according to plan, right? In trying to bring about this planned revolution, what you get is Stalin's Soviet Union, right? What you get is Mao Zedong's China. What you get is Pol Pot's Cambodia, right? What you get is Tito's Yugoslavia. You see? So it never happens. You may plan as much as you want, but then revolutions are never planned. It is spontaneous. That's why most of the revolutions, most of the uh, academicians in Western society, in America or in England or Western Europe, they do talk a lot about bringing about French revolutions, and those are some reputable academicians, right? Public intellectuals and academicians. It is sometimes I feel like they are a bit too arrogant in order to they're too arrogant to think that they're too arrogant. That's why maybe their arrogance blinds them from seeing that revolutions are not possible. I mean, planned revolutions are not possible. It's not possible. But they talk as though it is possible. So all the revolutions which people may think, which people are planning so that they may overthrow the existing system, it's never come to pass. It will never come to pass because revolutions are not planned. They are more or less spontaneous. So with the with the commencement of the French Revolution, what happens, right? The third estate, right, represented by the bourgeoisie, very skillfully, right, through skillful, adroit political maneuvering, increased its representation and also unified all the three states into a new legislative body called the National Assembly, right? So, so the third state, right? It removed The third estate made sure that it increased its representation. It also unified all the three states and then formed a new body, new legislative body called the National Assembly. Previously, it was called the States General, but now it's called the National Assembly. And then it passed into law the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizens, right? Very famous declaration in Western history, which passed into law the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens. And about few years from I think it was in 1970, 1794. I think that's when Thomas Paine, whom I admire a lot, he also published in defense of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, The Rights of Man. Right? It's a good read. I suggest that you read it, but it's good. So it passed into law the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizens, in which the new regime, right, the third state, obviously they have the control of the parliament. So the new regime assured, in which it assured that everyone, there will be equality before the law, equality of taxation, and equality to obtain political office, as well as to ensure the ideals of the rights to property, right, the freedom of expression, and so on. Right. So this were some enticing ideals being put forward to the citizens, right? And indeed, if I am a peasant living in 18th century France, I will be very, very delighted to know that I can enjoy equality before the law, that I will not be unfairly taxed, and that I too have an equal right to obtain political office regardless of my status, right? Not only that, I do have my right to property, freedom to express, and so on. So, in order to implement, right, in order to implement, um, in order to implement these ideals, right, in order to implement these ideals, the third state, right, the third state, they radically transformed, they radically transformed and restructured the whole social and political order of France, right? And how did they do that? They literally eliminated aristocracy as a legally recognized and privileged class. They confiscated the property of the church. They altered the power of monarchy, right? The power of monarchy was severely restricted, and in turn, the power of the legislative body, the National Assembly, was vastly increased, right? So now, these measures, right, these changes, cutting down the powers of the church, cutting down the powers of the church, then and also the power of the monarchy, confiscating the properties of the church. These measures were so radical, right, that the third state, they increasingly became more isolated from the major segment of the French society, right? They thought what they were doing is good. In some sense, they were, but then not everybody was on board, right? Not everyone liked the fact what not everyone liked what they were doing, right? You care not, right? These revolutionaries, right? You care not what happened or what actually went into the construction and the establishment of these previous institutions, right? You don't care. You're literally you're literally burning down the existing institutions, and in its stead, you're building a new one, right? What this third estate, what these revolutionaries forgot was that people tend to favor, they like changes, but not too radical, right? Not too radical. But then the revolutionaries, those who actually took, the revolutionaries, those people who were trying to bring change in the French society, they were quite radical in their measures, right? They were, and so furthermore, not only were they with all the radical changes being implemented in France, not only did they isolate themselves from the rest of the society that way, but also But also what happened was this: the removal of the old regime, right? The removal of the king, or the authority of the king or the judge. The removal of the old regime led to a new form of absolutism, right? And this was primarily led by the Jacobins, right? Jacobin, right? Yeah. They were the radical faction of the revolutionaries, right? They were quite radical. They were the most radical of the revolutionaries, right? And it was led by the famous individual, a very renowned, infamous individual known by the name of Maximilian Robespierre, right? He literally led the Jacobin, right? So what happened was that they removed the old authoritarian monarch, and in its place, instead of implementing the ideals, right? The ideals of what? What are the ideals, right? Representative government, equality, all that gleaming stuff. It never came to pass. They just replaced one absolutism with a new form of absolutism, right? Which was more or less led by the radical wing of the revolutionaries, known as the Jacobin, and it was led by under the leadership of Robespierre. And so they they more or less managed to control the National Assembly, right? The new legislative branch, the new legislature in France. They 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 managed to control the National Assembly, right? And under the leadership of Robespierre, the Jacobin, in order to realize the ideals of the revolution, right? In order to realize all the ideals of freedom, of equality, of fraternity, of egalitarianism, all that enticing ideals, right? In order to realize the ideals of the revolution, right? They could no longer tolerate any resistance, even if it meant using violence to bring forth all the gleaming and fulsome ideals of the revolution, right? They must use violence. They must control its population. They must shut down the voices of those who who goes against their wishes, right? You see, this is one thing later on when we discuss Edmund Burke, this becomes key because you see, like we discussed in the previous lecture, reality is very, very different. It's vastly different. It's vastly complex, vastly diverse. And what these revolutionary ideals tells us is that, oh, the revolution, the society, look at the society. Nothing is working out. It is bad. It is unfair. But we can make it fairer, right? We can make the society more fair. How do we do that? Oh, just replace the existing system, existing rulers, existing structure, and then we'll just replace them, and everything will be fine, right? And they those ideals by saying they embellish those revolutionary ideals by talking about, freedom and equality, which in reality are very, very abstract, right? So so what happened was that when these revolutionaries, right, for instance the Jacobin and led by Robespierre, whenever they realized that, reality is very different, right? It is not as simple as we thought it was, right? Just because we remove the existing structure and put a new one, everything will not fall into places, right? Everything will not just simply fall in its places, right? It is far more complex. People who were helping us, now they are against us, right? Now we have this group complaining, now that group complaining, now we have to do this, now we have to do that. It is not as simple as we thought, right? And looking at all these diverse problems that you're now faced with, what do? You begin to think, now the revolution is under threat, right? The revolution could not hold. The revolution is about to face a problem. Not just a problem, but it may fail. So the thing is, in order for revolution not to fail, right? What do these? So in order for revolution not to fail, these revolutionaries, right, especially the Jacobin and Robespierre, They decided, you know what, we're going to use force, even if it means using violence to bring about, to realize the fulsome ideals of revolution. We are going to use violence, right? And now that the Jacobins now control the convention, the National Assembly, and the government itself, they now had to make sure that the revolution will not fail, right? And they thought only strong leadership could save the revolution, right? We can't let revolution to fail, and we need a strong leadership to make sure that the revolution will not fail, right? Why? Because now they were not only were they facing economic distress, right? They were economically, they were in a big mess. Not only that, but also civil war was about to brew, right? There was a brewing storm of civil war, right? Imagine after replacing the government, right? They don't want that. They also had to satisfy the sans culottes, right? Those people who fought for them, right? Sans culottes. They also had to make sure that France will not be invaded by foreign nations, right? Again, those were existential threats to the revolutionaries, right? So in order, so now looking at all these complexities of reality, they thought, okay, you know what? Now we need a strong leadership under whose control we shall realize, bring to forth the ideals of the revolution, right? So what they decided was that they decided to form the Committee of Public Safety, right? The Committee of Public Safety, and it was a branch of the National Convention, and it was led by, of course, Robespierre, right? The Jacobin, by Robespierre, and the Committee for Public Safety was responsible, right? It had a broad sweeping power, right, which included the organization of nations' defense, all foreign policy, and supervision of ministry, right? They also ordered arrests and trials of counter-revolutionaries and imposed government authorities across the nation, right? And charged with this power, right? Given this broad prerogative of not just interpreting but also understanding and realizing the public good. And imagine these people, Robespierre and his lackeys, right, and his jamjas, they were responsible in order to bring forth and in order to realize the ideals of revolution. They were given the power to decide. They decided what is popular good. In other words, what is good for everybody. They decided, not the people, but they decided. At first, during the revolution, oh, the people know best, right? They know what is good for them, right? But now, the same people who replaced the old regime now saying, no, we know what is good for you. We will defend. We will decide the Committee for Public Safety. We will decide what is public good. The Jacobins, the Jacobins carried out, of course, under the leadership of Robespierre, carried out what is now known as the Reign of Terror. Right? It was known as the Reign of Terror mostly because it was the most brutal period of the French Revolution. Right? The French Revolution, whenever the revolution did actually happen, was not bloody at all. Not as bloody as the Reign of Terror. Right? In the Reign of Terror, right, under the leadership of Robespierre, close to 30 to 40,000 people were killed, right? Thousands of people were killed, thousands of people were executed. Mass execution, public and mass execution became normal, became routine, right? And and they decided who were the enemies of the revolution, right? They decided that. They decided. And not only were they against, and the thing is this, they were trying to the Committee for Public Safety, right? They were designed to fight the enemies of the revolution, right? To prevent counter-revolution from gaining ground. However, most of the people whom they arrested and later on killed were not aristocrats, but ordinary people, ordinary persons, right? Ordinary persons who actually supported them, right? At the beginning. You see, it's like it's like they not only killed, they also killed people who actually helped them come to power, right? That's what happens. This is the reality, right? Reality is never simple as we think it is. It's very easy to sit in one's place, right, and think that, oh, you judge the reality, and you find that the reality is found lacking, right? Something is not right, and then you say to yourself, ah, if only I had the power, I can change this and everything will be fine. But if you were given that power, it will not be fine. You will become Robespierre. Who knows? You will bring about the reign of terror, right? Where thousands of people were executed in the name of revolution. Thousands of people killed, massacred, executed in the name of revolution, right? This was the most bloodiest period in the whole of the revolution, right? The Committee for Public Safety, right? Robespierre became the judge. He decided who was the traitor. He decided who were the enemies of the revolution, right? And and the funny thing is that they talk about, at first the revolutionary says, "Oh, we are going to say freedom of expression," right? One of the ideals was freedom of expression. But guess what? But guess what? After the revolution, what happened? What happened? Right? You can't even say anything critical of the revolutionary government, right? You can't say anything critical. If you say, you will be executed, right? So where is the freedom of expression, right? At first, during the revolution, oh, freedom of expression, right? Liberty, equality. Where is the equality now? Where is the liberty now? Where is your freedom to express when you can't even express anything critical towards the government, right? That's what happened. And Robespierre, he thought he was he always saw himself as, I am most holier than thou, right? I am more holy than you, right? He tried to bring about an abstract principle, and this is what Burke was talking about, right? He tried to bring about this abstract principle into reality. Abstract is very simple, very clear, very precise. Nothing complex about it. There's no complexity. But the reality is not that simple, or it's not that simple. It's very complex. What I'm trying to say is, and this is what this is where Edmund Burke is trying to pinpoint the faults of this French Revolution. You see, the thing is, should we devote, right? Should we dedicate all our present resources for the attainment of the future ideal, which is not even possible, right? If the answer is yes, that we should dedicate all our present resources for the attainment of the perfect society, right? Then in what cost will it be possible? And the thing is it even attainable, right? Think about this, because this is not as simple as you think it is. Think about this. Should we dedicate our present resources to attain the future ideal? Because if you think about it, everybody knows, right? Go to any society in the world, and anyone will tell you how to change the society, right? How to make things better. They all have a say, right? At first, they'll be like, ah, no, who am I? I don't know anything. I'm not well educated. I do not know what is good. But then they'll not stop there. I don't know what is good. But if they really want to make things better, they should do this, they should do that, right? You see, the thing is, you get the French Revolution and its failures of it, and its failures, when you try to bring into realization some abstract ideal into the reality, right? Because the reality and the abstract are so different that whenever we try to implement the perfect ideal in the imperfect human society, it will never work, right? Because society will never be perfect. It will always be imperfect. And the ideas that you have, the ideals that you have, the abstract principles that you have, which are so perfect, when you try to implement them, when you try to realize them in the real world, you have chaos. you have bloodshed, you have more violence, like we find in the French Revolution. And so look at it, right? So he one thing I would say in defense of Robespierre is that he was a very naive person, right? Because he was a follower of Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? He was a big admirer of Rousseau, and he honestly believed, right? He honestly believed that the general will, which Rousseau talks about, right, in his social contract, that the general will is absolutely necessary, right? Absolutely necessary to realize, I mean, to make the republic of virtue a reality, right? In order to make a republic, a new society, a new republic full of virtue, right, full of virtuous person a reality, then the general will is a must. Of course, I'll tell you what the general will is. And so once you have that, then there's no way of returning back to absolutism, to despotism, right? And then Robespierre also knew that the Republic of Virtue, could not become a reality unless all these threats to foreign wars and the civil wars were removed. That's why he was brutal, right? He was brutal, and he undoubtedly, right, in full faith, believed that Rousseau's general will is the answer to the establishment of a new republic, a republic of virtue, right? And by Rousseau's general will, it simply means this. You see, the general will is propounded by Rousseau in his work, The Social Contract. And the general will is more or less this. Um, it is more or less like you can say the general will as the embodiment, right? It is the embodiment and it is the manifestation of citizens' common interests, right? All the citizens of a society, their common interest is the general will, right? Their common interest is embodied in the thing called the general will, right? A general will, where and that general will, Rousseau argues that in order for the general will to be truly general, it must come from all. Like everybody should, say that as everybody should give the consent, right? That that it should everybody should give the consent, and that general will should be applicable to all, right? It comes from all. The general will comes from all, and it applies to all, right? There is no, it is not a law where it is applicable to some and not applicable to another. It is universal in scope, right? The law is applicable to all because why? Because it comes from all, everybody, and it applies to all, right? And Rousseau believed that this condition, right, this condition will actually lead to a realization of a better society, right? And that's what Robespierre actually believed. He actually believed in this Rousseau's general will, where the common interest of the society of the citizens is embodied in the general will. But Rousseau, when he says general will, is an abstract term. General will is an abstract term. You can't see it, right? Me and my friends would say, okay, we like this, but then where is it? Where is the like, right? Where is the common interest? Rousseau says it's a general will, but then you can't see the general will. But then the problem with Robespierre was that he was trying to make into concrete an abstract principle, which is not possible, right? It's not possible to bring about the realization of an abstract principle into reality. Is not possible, right? Because you see, the ideal, the perfectness, right, is always concerned with the universal, right? It's applied to all, everybody, right? But the reality is far more complex and diverse. And the problem with this revolutionary thing is that you promise a future harmony, right? You promise a future perfect society, right? And then you begin to see and you begin to hold this future perfectness to be more important than the present, right? Which you find it always lacking. The present society is always lacking of something. injustice, right, inequality, right, discrimination is always found lacking. So in order to make it perfect, right, you sacrifice the present for the future harmony, which is not even possible because you're basing your future harmony based on some abstract principle which is not real, right? And in such a society where in such a society or situation where you are trying to implement changes in the society based on some perfect abstract principle, right? In such a situation you will not accept anybody going against you, right? Because how can you be wrong, right? Because you are aiming for the perfect society, and how can anybody say that you are wrong? How can that be wrong, right? And you see, this is the reason why you see this is the reason why uh, Burke was against Robespierre. I'm sorry, against the French Revolution. And this scenario provides a very good introduction as a good way to enter and understand Edmund Burke's political theory, political thought. Because without realizing this, I think without understanding this historical context of the French Revolution, I think we will never gain a proper understanding of Burke's political philosophy. And also because you see, the thing is, it's very easy to see why the result is more or less why the result is almost already a foregone conclusion with regards to a revolution which is based on abstract ideals, right? You see, the French Revolution started with saying, okay, freedom of expression, right? Equality, right? Representative government, yes or no? But then what did you find? The reality was so different, so complex, so difficult, so diverse, right? Those people in charge of the new government had they did not have the slightest idea about what to do, right? So what did they do instead? They began they began to they began to become not the they began they became more violent, more controlling, right? Indeed, they killed more people after the revolution than the revolution. When the revolution actually happened with overthrow of the monarchy, whatnot, of the church, people died, but not 30, 40,000, right? And the people who came to power, replacing the old monarchy, new power, new revolutionary government in place, promising such ideals as equality and freedom of expression. They came to power. Reality was very different. People began to criticize them. They executed them, right? You criticize, you get your head chopped off, right? That's what happened, right? 30 to imagine 30 to 40,000 people dying in a span of 1 year because the reign of terror was from 1793 to 1794. Or for one, not even 1 year, it was around 9 months. And in those 9 months, 30 to 40,000 people died. So you can judge whether 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 all the beliefs, all the good things that you have about society is right or wrong. You may think you're about to bring changes. Yeah, you'll bring more misery to the society, right? No, same thing. The Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring which happened in 2011, right? Everybody in the Western society, almost everybody, right? Oh, they were singing praises to the people of Egypt, to the people of Egypt, to the people of Tunisia, right, to the people of Syria, right. Oh, finally, a sea of democracy has won over this authoritarian Islamic society, right? Democracy, don't forget, is an abstract ideal. It's not a reality. It's not concrete. So, what is the result now? What do we have now? In Egypt, the centerpiece of the Arab Spring now is ruled by what? Military, right? Colonel Al-Sisi, right? He carried out coup d'etat and replaced, just imagine, it replaced the democratically elected president, right? See? So there you go. That's what happens with revolutions, right? We may think revolution is good. We have a rosy view about, oh, revolution is such so good, right? We have such a high hopes that all the changes, all the good things that revolution will bring. But guess what? They don't. Revolution is a lie. Well, I don't know, I'm just saying. We don't know. But if you study revolution, right, you'll find that revolution promises so many things, so many ideals, which the reality denies. Reality always denies. And indeed, abstract ideals can never overcome the realities, the diverse, messy realities of the real world. Okay, so now that we have introduced a context to Edmund Burke's ideas of philosophical political thoughts, we will jump into his philosophical thought in the next lecture. All right. So thank you all for listening. And if you do have any questions, please, you know, post them. I don't know what to say. Post them. Okay, post them, and I'll try to answer that in the next lecture with you. All right. Thank you.